Thylex led the human delegation deeper into the hidden memorial chamber, where ancient data crystals were stored in specially designed alcoves that had preserved thousands of years of forbidden historical records, and his clawed hands trembled slightly as he activated the first crystal containing actual footage from the Forgotten War. These recordings were made by my ancestors who survived the human campaigns, he explained, while holographic images began forming in the air above the crystal. They wanted future generations to understand what really happened, even if official history claimed humans never existed. The first hologram showed a Vorthak military base on a distant world where reptilian soldiers were loading captured civilians onto transport ships, their movements casual and efficient in a way that suggested such operations were routine rather than exceptional. This was how we operated before humans arrived, said Thylex with obvious shame. We took what we wanted from peaceful species and considered resistance futile because no one had the strength or courage to challenge predator rule. Jake watched the holographic civilians being herded into cargo holds like livestock, while Vorthak commanders discussed quotas and processing schedules, and he felt sick understanding that this scene had been repeated countless times across the galaxy. The image shifted to show the same base 3 days later when a small group of human soldiers infiltrated the facility using tactics that seemed impossible according to conventional military doctrine, moving through defensive positions like shadows while neutralizing guards without raising any alarms. 12 humans against 2,000 Vorthak warriors, whispered Thylex as the hologram showed human soldiers systematically disabling security systems and freeing captured civilians. They shouldn't have been able to get past the outer perimeter, but they moved like they understood our tactics better than we did. Lisa watched in fascination as the human soldiers adapted to alien technology in real time, reprogramming security systems and modifying captured weapons while maintaining perfect coordination, despite having no apparent communication equipment. The holographic record showed human soldiers establishing evacuation routes for the freed civilians while simultaneously preparing defensive positions to hold off inevitable counterattacks, their movements precise and purposeful in ways that suggested extensive planning and training. Your soldiers didn't just fight, observed Thylex, while the images showed humans teaching alien civilians basic defensive tactics during the evacuation. They educated others about how to protect themselves, spreading knowledge instead of keeping it secret. Zara studied the tactical formations that human soldiers used when Vorthak reinforcements arrived, noting how small groups could cover vast areas by using environmental advantages and psychological warfare that kept enemy forces guessing about human numbers and positions. The battle footage was unlike anything from Earth's military history because human soldiers seemed to anticipate enemy movements before they happened, responding to threats that hadn't yet materialized while maintaining defensive lines that should have been impossible with so few fighters. This is where we first encountered human persistence hunting, explained Thylex, as the hologram showed human soldiers pursuing retreating Vorthak forces across multiple star systems. We thought we could escape and regroup, but humans never stopped following us. The crystal showed a months-long campaign where human soldiers tracked fleeing predator forces through hyperspace jumps and asteroid fields, always arriving at enemy destinations just ahead of their quarry. Despite having inferior ships and navigation equipment, they turned pursuit into an art form, continued Thylex, while images showed human soldiers appearing in impossible locations. We would think we had lost them. then discover they had anticipated our destination and prepared ambushes. Jake recognized elements of Earth's military doctrine in the tactical displays, but the scale and effectiveness shown in these ancient recordings suggested that human soldiers had possessed capabilities far beyond anything in current military training manuals. The next crystal contained footage from the famous Siege of Seven Worlds, and the opening images showed the massive Vorthak invasion fleet that had surrounded the peaceful planets with overwhelming firepower and numerical superiority. 50,000 of our best warriors against 300 human volunteers, said Thylex, while the hologram displayed the tactical situation that should have resulted in immediate human defeat. My ancestors expected the siege to last hours, not months. The first week of battle footage showed human soldiers establishing defensive positions at the main hyperspace jump point, using captured alien technology to create fortifications that could channel enemy attacks into predetermined killing zones. Your soldiers learned faster than we could adapt, admitted Thylex, as the images showed humans reverse engineering Vorthak weapons during active combat. Every day they became more dangerous because they understood our equipment better than many of our own technicians. Lisa watched holographic records of human soldiers working in shifts to maintain continuous pressure on the invasion fleet, with some teams conducting raids while others improved defensive positions, and still others trained rescued civilians in evacuation procedures. The siege footage showed how human soldiers used psychological warfare as effectively as physical weapons, conducting raids that seemed designed more to demonstrate invincibility than to inflict casualties, making Vorthak commanders question their own tactical assumptions. By the third month, we were afraid to attack, confessed Thylex, while images showed Vorthak forces maintaining siege positions but avoiding direct confrontation with human defenders. Our soldiers were demoralized because humans had turned defense into offense. Zara studied tactical recordings that showed human soldiers capturing enemy supply ships and redistributing the contents to civilian evacuation efforts, turning Vorthak logistics against themselves while maintaining their own defensive capabilities. The most disturbing footage showed human soldiers providing medical treatment to wounded Vorthak prisoners, and Thylex explained that this unexpected mercy had created more fear among predator species than any weapon or tactic. We didn't understand soldiers who would risk their lives to save enemy wounded, he said, while the hologram showed humans treating injuries without regard for species or allegiance. It meant you were fighting for principles rather than survival, and principled enemies are impossible to predict or defeat. The final month of the siege showed human soldiers conducting increasingly complex operations that demonstrated mastery of three-dimensional space combat, using asteroid fields and gravitational anomalies as weapons while protecting civilian evacuation ships. Your soldiers held the line until every civilian was safely evacuated, said Thylex, while the hologram showed the last transport ships jumping to hyperspace. 6 billion people escaped because 300 humans refused to consider surrender. Jake watched the final battle sequence where human soldiers abandoned their defensive positions and launched a direct assault on the Vorthak command ship, not to win the siege, but to ensure that Predator forces couldn't pursue the evacuating civilians. The crystal footage ended with human soldiers disappearing into hyperspace rather than accepting capture or negotiating surrender, leaving behind only empty defensive positions and demoralized Vorthak forces who had learned to fear an enemy they couldn't understand. That's when predator species across the galaxy realized what we were facing, explained Thylex while activating another crystal that contained council meeting footage. Not just effective warriors, but an entire species that considered protection of others more important than personal survival. The next holographic sequence showed emergency sessions of predator species leadership, where alien commanders discussed the implications of human military capabilities and the threat they pose to traditional conquest-based civilizations. "Your soldiers weren't just unbeatable in combat," said Thylex, while council footage showed increasingly desperate attempts to find countermeasures against human tactics. They were changing the fundamental nature of galactic politics by proving that peaceful species could be protected. Lisa recorded council discussions where predator species debated whether to escalate the conflict or find some other solution to the human problem, with many speakers expressing fear that continued warfare would only make humans more effective and dangerous. The final crystal contained footage from the secret conclave where predator species made the decision to use temporal technology for forced exile rather than continue fighting an enemy that grew stronger with every encounter. "We chose exile over genocide," said Thylex, while the hologram showed alien leaders activating ancient temporal manipulation devices. "Not because we were merciful, but because we were afraid that trying to destroy humanity would only make your soldiers more determined to protect others." The temporal manipulation footage showed Earth being isolated in an accelerated time bubble that would allow human civilization to develop in isolation, while predator species learned to function in a galaxy where oppression carried the risk of human intervention. The temporal barriers were supposed to last only until we could adapt, explained Thylex, while the crystal showed calculations that had clearly. Captain Jake Martinez joined Lisa and Zara in the hidden memorial chamber after receiving their urgent message about the discovery of humanity's forgotten history, and his expression shifted from curiosity to grim understanding as Thylex began, revealing the complete truth about what had happened thousands of years ago. "Your species was never isolated by choice," explained the Vorthak historian while activating additional lighting that revealed even more wall carvings depicting the scope of ancient human civilization. "During what we call the Great Expansion era, humans had spread across dozens of star systems as explorers and protectors. The memorial walls showed star maps with human settlements scattered throughout the galaxy, connected by trade routes and communication networks that suggested a thriving civilization with technology far beyond what Earth possessed in the current era. But you weren't conquerors like the predator species," continued Thylex while pointing to carvings that showed humans working alongside peaceful alien civilizations. "You were nomadic warriors who moved from system to system, helping others defend themselves against oppression." Jake studied the artistic depictions of human soldiers training alien civilians in defensive tactics, and wondered how his species had managed to forget such an important part of their own history. Though the temporal manipulation symbols throughout the chamber suggested the forgetting hadn't been natural. "The predator species ruled through fear back then," said Thylex while indicating carvings that showed Vorthak, Zephyrian, and other aggressive aliens enslaving or destroying peaceful civilizations. "We took what we wanted, killed anyone who resisted, and considered it our right as the strongest." Lisa recorded everything while trying to understand how human soldiers had managed to challenge species with superior numbers and technology, because the carvings suggested that humans had been vastly outnumbered in every major conflict. "Then humans arrived and everything changed," continued Thylex, with emotions that the translator couldn't quite capture. "Your soldiers didn't just fight back. They fought with a combination of tactical brilliance and moral purpose that we had never encountered." The wall carvings showed human military units using guerrilla warfare tactics that seemed to defy conventional military logic, striking from impossible positions and vanishing before enemy forces could respond effectively. You were persistence hunters who treated warfare like a science, explained Thylex, while touching a carving that showed human soldiers studying terrain and enemy movements. But you also had something else that terrified us more than any weapon. Jake leaned closer to examine carvings that depicted human soldiers risking their lives to save alien civilians, including members of the same predator species they were. Fighting against, you would sacrifice everything for others, said Thylex, with what might have been wonder. Even your enemy's children were protected by human soldiers if they were innocent, and that kind of moral code was completely foreign to predator species. Zara studied images that showed human medics treating wounded aliens regardless of which side they fought for, while human engineers helped rebuild destroyed cities even while battles continued in nearby sectors. The breaking point came during the Siege of Seven Worlds, said Thylex while moving to the largest carving that dominated the central wall. A Vorthak invasion fleet surrounded 7 peaceful planets and demanded total surrender. The carving showed a massive alien armada facing a tiny human defensive force, with odds that should have resulted in immediate defeat for the vastly outnumbered human soldiers. 300 human soldiers volunteered to hold the main jump point while civilian evacuation ships prepared to flee, continued Thylex. They knew it was a suicide mission, but they did it anyway because 6 billion innocent people needed time to escape. Jake felt a chill of recognition as he studied the tactical situation depicted in the ancient artwork. Because the human defensive strategy showed elements that were still taught in Earth's military academies without anyone knowing where those tactics had originated. The siege lasted 6 months, said Thylex, while his voice carried the weight of genetic memory. 300 humans against 50,000 Vorthak warriors, and somehow the humans not only held their position but began winning. The wall carvings showed the progression of the battle as human soldiers adapted to every enemy tactic, turning defensive positions into offensive weapons and using the enemy's own strengths against them. Your soldiers didn't just fight, they learned, explained Thylex while indicating panels that showed humans capturing enemy equipment and reverse engineering it during active combat. Every day they became more dangerous, more unpredictable, more effective. Lisa noticed that the artistic style changed as the siege progressed, with early panels showing desperate human defenders gradually transforming into images of confident warriors who had turned the tide of battle through sheer determination. By the end of the siege, Vorthak commanders were afraid to attack, admitted Thylex, with what appeared to be inherited shame. They had overwhelming superiority in numbers and firepower, but human soldiers had become like ghosts who struck from nowhere and vanished before we could retaliate. The final panels of the siege showed evacuation ships safely jumping to hyperspace, while human soldiers held their positions until the last civilian was safe, then disappeared into the void rather than surrender to superior forces. 6 billion people escaped because 300 humans refused to give up, said Thylex while touching the memorial carving with reverence. And that's when my people realized. We weren't fighting just soldiers. We were fighting an entire species of protectors. Jake studied the aftermath panels that showed predator species across the galaxy discussing what they had witnessed, with artistic representations of fear and confusion that suggested the siege had fundamentally changed galactic politics. Human soldiers became legends, continued Thylex. Stories spread about warriors who never retreated, never surrendered, and grew more dangerous when protecting others, and predator species began to question whether conquest was worth facing human resistance. Zara found carvings that depicted human military units arriving at dozens of different worlds where oppression was occurring, always appearing exactly when peaceful civilizations needed protection most desperately. "You weren't just effective fighters," explained Thylex. "You were moral fighters who made predator species confront the difference between strength and cruelty, between victory and honor." The memorial walls showed the gradual shift in galactic politics as predator species found their traditional tactics becoming ineffective against human interference, while peaceful civilizations gained confidence from knowing protectors existed. "Some predator species tried to negotiate with humans," said Thylex, while indicating panels that showed diplomatic meetings. "But your people's demands were simple and non-negotiable. Stop oppressing others or face the consequences." Lisa recorded images that showed human representatives offering predator species the choice between peaceful coexistence and continued warfare, with the clear implication that humans preferred peace but were prepared for eternal conflict if necessary. "The war didn't end with a great battle," continued Thylex while moving to the final section of the memorial. "It ended when the predator species realized they could never win against an enemy that treated protection of others as a sacred duty." The last major panel showed what appeared to be a council gathering where alien species made a collective decision, with temporal symbols that suggested the use of advanced technology to solve an unsolvable problem. "My ancestors and others like them gathered in secret and made a terrible choice," admitted Thylex with obvious regret. "They decided to use ancient temporal technology to erase humans from galactic memory and force your species back to Earth." Jake felt anger rising as he understood the implications of what had been done to humanity, but also recognition that the aliens had been faced with an impossible situation where their entire way of life was being challenged. "It wasn't meant to be permanent exile," said Thylex quickly. "The temporal barriers were designed to last only until predator species could adapt to a galaxy where peaceful civilizations had protection." The temporal manipulation panels showed Earth being isolated in a bubble of accelerated time where human civilization would develop in isolation while the rest of the galaxy learned to function without oppression. "But something went wrong with the temporal calculations," continued Thylex, while indicating symbols that suggested uncontrolled variables. What was supposed to be a few centuries of isolation became thousands of years. And meanwhile, predator species passed down genetic memories of human soldiers. Zara studied the final panels that showed the gradual decay of the temporal barriers and the unexpected development of human space technology that allowed Earth to receive the Galactic Council's invitation. "The fear responses you've witnessed are inherited memories," explained Thylex. "Genetic programming that warns predator species about humans even though most of us don't consciously remember why we should be afraid." Lisa lowered her recording equipment and looked directly at the Vorthak historian who had risked everything to share this forbidden knowledge with the human delegation. "Why are you telling us this?" she asked, while trying to understand his. Captain Jake Martinez stood at the observation deck of the USS Liberty and watched the massive space station grow larger in the viewport as they approached, his hands clasped behind his back while he studied the incredible structure that seemed to stretch endlessly in all directions with docking bays that could fit entire cities and towers that spiraled into space like metal trees reaching for distant stars. The message had arrived on Earth 6 months ago through channels that nobody understood. Transmitted in perfect English, despite coming from somewhere beyond the outer rim of known space. And it was simple enough that even the politicians couldn't mess it up with their usual debates and committees, because it said exactly what it meant, without any room for confusion or misunderstanding. Greetings to the people of Earth. You are invited to join the Galactic Council as representatives of your species. Please send a delegation to Nexus 7 Station at these coordinates. We look forward to meeting you and welcoming you into our community of peaceful civilizations, Dr. Lisa Park stood beside him, checking her translation equipment for the 100th time since they left Earth orbit, her nervous energy making her fidget with the controls while she ran through the language protocols that were supposed to help them communicate with alien species they had never seen or heard of before today. The universal translators should work perfectly according to the specifications they sent us, she said while adjusting the small device attached to her collar that would supposedly convert any alien language into perfect English and vice versa, though she still had her doubts about trusting technology that seemed too good to be true. Colonel Rick Davis joined them at the viewport, wearing his dress uniform with all the ribbons and medals that showed his 30 years of service in the Earth Defense Forces. And even though this was supposed to be a peaceful diplomatic mission, he insisted on representing the military branch of human civilization because someone needed to assess potential threats and defensive capabilities. First contact with aliens, and they want us to come to their space station, he said, while studying the tactical implications of entering an unknown structure that could easily be a trap designed to capture or destroy the human delegation. Though he kept these concerns to himself since the mission was already approved, and there was no point in creating unnecessary worry. The docking bay that guided them in was enormous enough to hold 50 ships the size of the Liberty, and as they settled onto the landing platform, Jake could see other vessels that belonged to species he couldn't even begin to imagine, with designs that followed no earthly logic and materials that seemed to shift and change color in the artificial lighting. The airlock opened with a soft hiss, and the first thing that hit them was the smell of ozone and something that reminded Lisa of cinnamon mixed with copper. While the artificial gravity felt slightly lighter than Earth normal, and the air had a quality that made everything seem more vivid, and sharp Ambassador Kelrin was waiting for them with what appeared to be an honor guard of various alien species, and his appearance was surprisingly humanoid, except for the pale blue skin and eyes that seemed to contain swirling galaxies, while his voice carried a musical quality that made even simple words sound like poetry. Welcome to Nexus 7, representatives of Earth, he said with a bow that somehow managed to convey both respect and curiosity. I am Ambassador Kelrin of the Alterian Confederation, and I speak for the Galactic Council in extending our formal invitation for your species to join our community. Jake stepped forward as the designated leader of the human delegation and offered his hand in the universal gesture of peace, which Kelrin accepted with obvious interest in this human custom, while the other aliens observed everything with various degrees of attention and what might have been amusement. Captain Jake Martinez of Earth, he said, while trying to project confidence and authority without seeming aggressive or threatening. We are honored by your invitation and eager to learn about your civilization and how we might contribute to the peace and prosperity of the galaxy. The tour of the station took several hours as they moved through corridors that seemed to stretch forever. Past chambers filled with alien delegates discussing matters in languages that sounded like music or static or ocean waves, while Lisa's translator worked overtime to provide context for the conversations they overheard. Dr. Park noticed that some of the aliens seemed unusually interested in their small group, particularly the tall reptilian beings that Kelrin identified as Vorthak and the insect-like creatures called Zephyrians, who seemed to follow them at a distance while pretending to be engaged in other activities. Colonel Davis was discussing Earth's defensive capabilities when the first strange incident occurred, as he mentioned the readiness of human soldiers to defend their homeworld from any potential threats, which seemed like a reasonable topic for a military representative to address during first contact procedures. The reaction was immediate and unmistakable as several Vorthak delegates stopped their conversations and turned toward the human group with what could only be described as alarm, while their translator devices began emitting static and error codes instead of converting the colonel's words into their language. "Fascinating," said Kelrin quickly while moving to stand between the humans and the agitated aliens. "Perhaps we could discuss Earth's cultural achievements instead, as military matters can be quite complex and our translation systems sometimes struggle with technical terminology." Lisa noticed that her own translator had flagged the word soldiers with a warning message she had never seen before, indicating some kind of linguistic barrier or cultural sensitivity that wasn't explained in any of the documentation they had received from the Galactic Council. The Zephyrian delegates were making clicking sounds that their translators rendered as expressions of distress or fear, while backing away from the human group as if Colonel Davis had suddenly become dangerous simply by mentioning Earth's military personnel and their dedication to protecting innocent people. "Is there some problem with our translation equipment?" asked Jake, while trying to understand why a simple reference to human soldiers had caused such an unusual reaction among species that were supposed to be welcoming them into their peaceful community. "No problem at all," replied Kelrin with a smile that seemed forced and artificial. "Sometimes certain concepts don't translate well between species due to cultural differences and historical contexts that can create misunderstandings. So it's better to focus on topics that promote mutual understanding and cooperation." The rest of the tour continued without incident as long as Colonel Davis avoided any mention of Earth's military forces or defensive capabilities, though Lisa noticed that several alien species continued to observe them with what appeared to be nervous attention whenever the colonel spoke. The formal introduction ceremony took place in a vast chamber filled with delegates from dozens of different species, each one representing civilizations that spanned multiple star systems and possessed technologies that seemed like magic compared to Earth's relatively primitive capabilities. Jake delivered the prepared speech about humanity's desire for peace and cooperation, while Lisa monitored the translation systems and noticed that certain words continued to cause problems, particularly terms related to warfare, conflict resolution, and protective services. When Colonel Davis was introduced as a representative of Earth's military forces, the same pattern of distress and translator malfunctions occurred among the predator species, while the more peaceful-looking aliens seemed confused by their colleagues' reactions. "We look forward to learning from your advanced civilizations," Jake concluded his speech, "and we hope that humanity can contribute something valuable to the peace and prosperity of the galactic community through our unique perspectives and capabilities." The applause was polite, but Jake noticed that certain species seemed reluctant to approach them afterward, particularly the Vorthak and Zephyrians, who maintained their distance while engaging in what appeared to be urgent conversations among themselves as the ceremony ended and the human delegation was escorted to their temporary quarters on the station. Lisa couldn't shake the feeling that there was something important they weren't being told about humanity's place in galactic society and why the mention of soldiers seemed to trigger such strong reactions. "Something's not right here," she whispered to Jake as they walked through the corridors toward their rooms. The way those aliens reacted to military terminology suggests there's more to this first contact situation than we've been told. Jake nodded while maintaining his diplomatic composure for the benefit of their alien escort. But he was already planning to discuss these observations with his team and figure out why Earth's invitation to join the Galactic Council came with such strange restrictions on what they could discuss. The mystery was just beginning, and none of them realized that they were about to uncover a truth that would change everything they thought they knew about humanity's place in the galaxy and why predator species throughout the stars had learned to fear a single word that should have been nothing more than a simple military designation. Dr. Lisa Park couldn't sleep in her assigned quarters on Nexus 7 because her mind kept returning to the strange translation errors and the fearful reactions of the alien delegates whenever Colonel Davis mentioned human soldiers. So she decided to use her access credentials to explore the station's linguistic databases and find answers to questions that were keeping her awake. The corridors were dimly lit during the station's night cycle, and Lisa moved quietly through the empty passages toward the central data core, where all translation protocols and linguistic archives were stored. According to the station schematics they had been provided during their orientation, Tour Zara Quinn was already waiting at the entrance to the data center when Lisa arrived, having sent a secure message earlier suggesting they work together to investigate the translation anomalies that both women had noticed during their first day of diplomatic meetings. "I've been thinking about those error codes all evening," said Zara while activating her portable computer interface. "The pattern suggests deliberate programming rather than random malfunctions, like someone specifically coded the translators to avoid certain human military terms." Lisa connected her own equipment to the station's network and began searching. Through the massive linguistic databases that contained translation matrices for over 3,000 different alien languages, each one carefully calibrated to provide accurate communication between species with vastly different cultural backgrounds. The search results were immediate and disturbing, because the word soldiers appeared in a restricted access file that required security clearance far above what any human delegate should possess. And when they tried to access the file, their computer systems were immediately flagged by the station's security protocols. "This is definitely not a translation error," whispered Lisa, while watching her screen fill with warning messages about unauthorized access attempts and potential security violations. "Someone has deliberately classified information about human soldiers at the highest possible security level." Zara worked quickly to bypass the security systems, using techniques she had learned during her years as a communications specialist for Earth's deep space exploration program, and after several tense minutes, she managed to download fragments of data before the station's automated defenses could completely block their access. The file fragments contained references to something called the Terran Incident and timestamps. That indicated the events had occurred thousands of years before humanity's supposed first contact with alien civilizations, which made no sense according to everything they had been told about Earth's isolation until this moment. "Look at this," said Zara while pointing to a series of images that appeared to show human figures in combat situations against alien forces. These records suggest that humans were already known to the galactic community long before we supposedly developed space travel. Lisa studied the partial files and found references to the day the prey became hunters, along with military reports that described human tactical capabilities in terms that seemed almost fearful rather than respectful, as if whoever wrote these documents considered humans to be dangerous rather than peaceful. The security alarms began sounding throughout the data center as the station's artificial intelligence detected their unauthorized access and started tracing their connection back to its source, forcing both women to quickly disconnect their equipment and delete any traces of their presence. "We need to get out of here before security arrives," said Lisa while packing her computer gear and moving toward the exit. But they were intercepted by a figure emerging from the shadows near the main entrance to the data center. The alien was clearly Vorthak, based on his reptilian features and scaled skin, but he moved with careful deliberation rather than the aggressive posture they had observed from other members of his species during the diplomatic meetings. "You seek answers about your people's history," said the Vorthak, in accented but clear English. "I am Thylex, and I know why my people fear the word you call soldiers, but we cannot speak here where others might overhear our conversation." Lisa and Zara exchanged glances while trying to decide whether they could trust this alien who seemed to be offering exactly the information they were looking for, but who also belonged to one of the species that had shown the strongest fear response to human military terminology. "Why would you help us?" asked Zara, while keeping her voice low and her body positioned near the exit, in case this was some kind of trap designed to capture humans who were asking too many questions about galactic history because my people carry memories that your species has forgotten," replied Thylex, while checking the corridors to make sure they weren't being observed. "And because the truth serves peace better than lies, even when the truth is difficult to accept or understand." The Vorthak historian led them through maintenance tunnels that ran beneath the main levels of the station, past humming machinery and environmental systems that kept the massive structure functioning while housing thousands of beings from dozens of different worlds. "My ancestors kept oral traditions about humans that date back over 4,000 years, explained Thylex as they walked through the dimly lit passages. Stories that were passed down through generations even though official records were destroyed or sealed away. They emerged in a hidden chamber that appeared to be some kind of memorial or shrine, with walls covered in symbols and images that clearly depicted humans in various situations alongside alien species, though many of the carvings seemed to show conflict rather than peaceful cooperation. This chamber was built by survivors of the ancient wars, said Thylex, while activating hidden lighting that revealed the full scope of the memorial. Species who wanted to remember what really happened even after the official decision was made to erase humans from galactic memory. Lisa stared at the wall carvings that showed human figures fighting alongside alien civilians against what appeared to be military forces from predator species, and the artistic style suggested these events had occurred during a time period that should have been prehistory according to Earth's recorded timeline. "You're saying humans were here before?" asked Lisa, while studying images that depicted small groups of human soldiers holding defensive positions against overwhelming odds. "But that's impossible, because we only developed space travel within the last century." "Time moves differently for different species," replied Thylex, while pointing to a series of symbols that seemed to indicate some kind of temporal manipulation or forced isolation. "What you call the past may not be as fixed as you believe, especially when advanced civilizations decide to rewrite history." Zara was recording everything with her portable scanner while trying to understand the implications of what they were seeing. Because if humans had previously been part of galactic civilization, then Earth's supposed isolation was not natural, but deliberately imposed by someone with the power to alter reality itself. The predator species ruled through fear and violence until humans arrived, continued Thylex, while indicating carvings that showed the progression of events. Your soldiers didn't just fight. They fought in ways that terrified beings who thought they understood warfare and conquest. The memorial walls depicted human military units using tactics that seemed impossible according to conventional military theory, with small groups defeating much larger forces through what appeared to be superior strategy, environmental adaptation, and something that the alien artists had tried to capture in stone but couldn't quite express. Humans were persistence hunters, explained Thylex while touching a carving that showed human soldiers pursuing retreating enemies across multiple star systems. They never gave up, never surrendered, and became more dangerous when cornered or when protecting others. Lisa found herself looking at images that showed human soldiers risking their lives to save alien civilians from predator species attacks, and the artistic style suggested that these acts of sacrifice had been completely unexpected by the galactic community. The breaking point came during what your people called the Siege of 7 Worlds, said Thylex, while indicating a large central carving that dominated one wall. 300 human soldiers held off an invasion fleet of 50,000 aliens for 6 months. The carving showed a desperate last stand that somehow turned into victory through tactics that the alien artists could only represent symbolically, with human figures standing between predator forces and refugee ships carrying millions of civilian evacuees to safety. My ancestors were among those evacuees, admitted Thylex while his voice carried emotions that the translation software couldn't quite capture. Vorthak civilians who were saved by human soldiers who died to give us time to escape. Zara lowered her scanner and looked directly at the Vorthak historian with new understanding about why his people might fear human soldiers, while also feeling obligated to preserve their memory in secret memorials like this hidden chamber. What happened to them? Asked Lisa while studying the final panels that seemed to show some kind of ending or conclusion to the ancient conflict. How did humans disappear from galactic history if they were so effective as protectors? The predator species realized they weren't fighting just soldiers, replied. The emergency session of the Galactic Council convened within hours after security forces discovered evidence of unauthorized access to the historical archives, and Captain Jake Martinez stood before the assembled delegates, knowing that humanity's future in galactic society would be determined by the choices made in the next few hours. Ambassador Kelran called for order as representatives from dozens of species filled the vast council chamber, while predator species delegates clustered together in obvious agitation and peaceful civilizations watched with curiosity about what had prompted this unprecedented emergency gathering. The human delegation has been accused of accessing classified historical records, announced Kelran while his voice carried formal authority despite obvious discomfort with the situation. These actions constitute a serious violation of diplomatic protocols and raise questions about humanity's suitability for council membership. Colonel Rick Davis stepped forward wearing his dress uniform and carrying himself with the bearing of a career soldier, while Lisa and Zara flanked him with data crystals containing copies of everything they had discovered in the hidden memorial chamber. We accessed those records because we discovered that our translators were being deliberately programmed to malfunction. Whenever we mentioned human soldiers, said Jake firmly, and we found evidence that humanity's so-called first contact with galactic civilization is actually a return from forced exile. The reaction was immediate and dramatic as predator species delegates began making distress calls while their translators emitted static and error codes, exactly as they had done during the first diplomatic meetings when military terminology was mentioned. "These are dangerous lies designed to disrupt galactic peace," declared the lead Vorthak representative, while backing away from the human delegation. "Humans are a primitive species that has only recently developed space travel and has no prior history with our civilizations." "Then explain this," said Lisa, while activating the data crystals that projected holographic images from the memorial chamber, showing wall carvings that depicted humans fighting alongside alien civilians against predator species forces. The peaceful species delegates leaned forward with obvious interest, while predator species representatives showed increasing signs of panic as the ancient artwork revealed humanity's forgotten role as galactic protectors. "These images show events that occurred thousands of years ago," continued Lisa, while the holograms displayed memorial carvings depicting the Siege of 7 Worlds, including detailed records of human soldiers holding defensive positions to protect civilian evacuations. Zara activated additional crystals that showed footage from the ancient war, including tactical recordings that demonstrated human military capabilities far beyond what any primitive species should possess. The temporal manipulation symbols in these records indicate that humanity was deliberately erased from galactic memory, added Zara, while pointing to holographic evidence of the forced exile. "Our people were imprisoned on Earth using advanced technology to prevent interference with predator species operations." The council chamber erupted in chaos as peaceful species demanded explanations, while predator species called for immediate expulsion of the human delegation before they could spread more dangerous information about the forgotten war. "Enough," said Colonel Davis, in a voice that cut through the noise and commanded attention from every being in the chamber. "You want to know what human soldiers are capable of? Let me show you." At that moment, as if summoned by fate itself, emergency alarms began sounding throughout the station as urgent messages arrived about a pirate attack on a peaceful colony in a nearby star system, with civilian casualties mounting and local defenses completely overwhelmed. "The Kepler colony is under attack by Raider Coalition forces," announced the communications officer, while tactical displays showed the desperate situation. "They're requesting immediate assistance from any available military units." Ambassador Kelrin looked around the council chamber where predator species possessed the military strength to respond, but showed no inclination to risk their forces protecting others, while peaceful civilizations lacked the capability to mount an effective rescue operation. "We could dispatch a council peacekeeping force," said Kelrin weakly, "but it would take days to organize and approve the mission through proper channels, and by then the colony will be destroyed." Colonel Davis stepped into the center of the chamber and made a decision that would change everything the aliens thought they knew about human soldiers and their dedication to protecting innocent people. "Give me 12 volunteers from the crew of the USS Liberty," he said, while studying the tactical situation on the display screens. "We can reach the colony in 6 hours and provide immediate assistance to the civilian population." 12 humans against an entire pirate fleet, protested the Vorthak representative. "That's not a rescue mission. That's suicide, and it proves that humans are too primitive to understand modern warfare." "Maybe," replied Colonel Davis with a smile that reminded every predator species delegate of genetic memories they couldn't quite explain. "But those civilians need help now. Not after your committees finished debating whether they deserve to live." Jake authorized the mission immediately while understanding that they were demonstrating exactly the kind of protective instinct that had terrified predator species thousands of years ago, when human soldiers made defending others their highest priority. The council delegates watched through real-time communications as the small human strike team approached the besieged colony where Raider coalition ships were systematically destroying defensive installations while preparing to harvest the civilian population Kepler colony. "This is Colonel Davis of the Earth Defense Forces," came the transmission as human ships entered the combat zone. "We're here to assist with evacuation and defensive operations." The tactical displays showed what appeared to be an impossible situation, as 12 human soldiers faced a raider fleet of over 60 ships with superior firepower and numerical advantage, exactly the kind of odds that had become legendary during the ancient war. "This is insane," muttered the Zephyrian delegate while watching human ships begin their attack approach. "They're going to get themselves killed for people they've never met." But instead of the quick defeat that everyone expected, the human strike team began demonstrating the same tactical brilliance that had made their ancestors legendary throughout the galaxy thousands of years earlier. The humans used the colony's asteroid field as cover while conducting hit-and-run attacks that disrupted raider formations, turning environmental hazards into weapons while maintaining perfect coordination despite being vastly outnumbered. "They're not trying to destroy the entire fleet," observed Lisa while studying the tactical patterns. "They're focusing on protecting the civilian evacuation ships and disrupting raider logistics." Colonel Davis and his team established defensive corridors that allowed civilian transports to escape, while human fighters drew enemy fire away from helpless targets. Exactly the kind of protective strategy that had defined human military doctrine during the Forgotten War. The battle continued for hours as human soldiers adapted to raider tactics in real time, capturing enemy weapons and turning them against their former owners while providing cover for civilian evacuation operations. "Impossible," whispered Thylex from his position among the Vorthak delegates. "They're fighting exactly like the soldiers from the ancient records, as if the tactical knowledge was passed down through genetic memory." The most shocking moment came when human soldiers provided medical assistance to wounded raiders who had been abandoned by their own forces, demonstrating the same moral code that had terrified predator species in the ancient war. "Last civilian transport is clear," announced Colonel Davis as the final evacuation ship reached safety. "All raiders have been neutralized or captured, and we're providing medical assistance to wounded personnel regardless of affiliation." The council chamber fell silent as delegates absorbed what they had witnessed, because 12 human soldiers had accomplished what should have required a full fleet while maintaining their commitment to protecting innocents and showing mercy to enemies. "Zero civilian casualties," reported the colony commander. "The human strike team eliminated all threats while ensuring complete evacuation of our population, and they're now helping with reconstruction efforts." Ambassador Kelrin stared at the tactical displays that showed human soldiers working alongside former enemies to repair damage and treat injuries, embodying exactly the kind of principled warfare that had made their ancestors legendary. "Now you understand what human soldiers really are," said Jake while addressing the entire council. "We're not conquerors or destroyers. We're protectors who fight because innocent people need someone willing to stand between them and those who would do them harm." The Vorthak delegate looked directly at Colonel Davis with obvious recognition of something his genetic memory had been programmed to fear, but also with what might have been gratitude for soldiers who had once saved his ancestors from oppression. The ancient records were true, he admitted finally. "Human soldiers don't fight for conquest or glory, they